I want to really welcome all of you to our very special Zoom session. I'm so looking forward to our discussion today, and I believe it's actually coming probably at the most perfect time. What a crazy week this has been. That's an understatement, isn't it? The murder of George Floyd has reignited the racial conflict that we have had in this country for way too long. If you're interested in discussing that more further, by the way, tomorrow's Lunch and Learn at noon will be about that. We're just going to talk about how we're feeling about all that. For our session today, I am so glad that we have with us Ann Ravel, who I believe can share some insight and thoughts about where we are at as a country, where we need to go. But I also want to say to all of you officially, and this is very official, I'm about to say, I hope you're all listening, that this Temple Emanu-El does not endorse any candidates. We do not endorse any candidates. But I have to say, as a private citizen, my wife and I and my son all felt very proud to vote for Ann in the primary. And we look forward to voting for her again in November when she kicks some butt, because we need her, right? We need her leading in this state very much. So before I introduce Ann Ravel, I want to just remind you all that you are muted for the moment. And if you have a question, please send your question to me, or you may want to send it to Oliver, who's with us. Thank you, Oliver, for your tech support and all your help that you give us. And we'll do our best to get to your questions. There's so much to talk about, isn't there, Ann? So I really want to first just introduce you properly. You deserve it. And I think people need to know a little bit about you, some grounding about who this Ann Ravel is. It's my great honor to introduce Ann Ravel, who is director of MapLight's Digital Deception Project, which leads the development and promotion of policies that tackle online disinformation and politics. She's a lecturer at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. She was appointed to the Federal Election Commission by President Obama, serving from 2013 to 2017, holding the roles of vice chair and chair, and previously chaired the California Fair Political Practices Commission, appointed by Governor Jerry Brown. She was appointed by President Obama as Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the United States Department of Justice, and served as Santa Clara County Counsel for over a decade. In 2014, she was named a California Attorney of the Year by the California Lawyer magazine, and in 2007, the State Bar of California named Public Attorney of the Year. Wow, that's pretty amazing, Ann. She received her Bachelor of Arts from the University of California in Berkeley and her JD from the University of California, Hastings College of the Law, which my sister attended also. And for any of us that know Ann Ravel, we can attest to her lifelong commitment to Menschlichkeit, to doing the right and good thing. She is a wonderful human being, and I think a much needed leader in California. And I welcome you, Ann, to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. And I love the dog, so keep those dogs in the picture. I also, as most of you or many of you may know, I grew up here in the Valley from about the time I was 11. Back in the day when it was the Valley of the Heart's Delight. And I used to walk through cherry orchards to get to Willow Glen High School. And I tell people I have done everything there is to do with an apricot, because I worked in the canneries. And many of you might have had the same experiences. I picked fruit. So I know what life is like. And I remember being in, and this is going to be apropos to some of our conversation too, I worked in the canneries in particular, but also picking fruit, of course, with a lot of Mexican immigrants at the time. And I remember the other women on the assembly line, they had kids, they were supporting those kids. It was really hard work. And I was in a very stable middle-class family. It was very different for me. But those people were getting paid a lot less than others in the cannery. And that was among my first experiences of why we have such economic disparity in this valley. And it hasn't changed.
Absolutely. And maybe that's we could jump right into that. That can lead us into
Sure.
maybe the first kind of question, which is a little bit of a reflection about the state of unrest that's happening right now in our country and in our city specifically. And a part of that could maybe be, Ann, that we have a large group of individuals who really feel like they have not been dealt with or served properly, that they have been on the periphery, and it kind of seemed to ignite them this past week. What happened? What is your take on all this?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any question that that's a really big element in it. I mean, as we were talking about before, it sort of surprises me that people are saying, oh, COVID-19 laid bare that there was a disparity in healthcare for people, that the poor have much less access to healthcare. But in fact, in this valley, it has been so obvious for so many years that there is not only a totally huge chasm of economic abilities, stability between the low-income people here, who many of them are verging on homelessness, even though they work many jobs, and the very wealthy. And it's impacting not only their livelihoods, but their ability to get ahead, because schools are also disparate in this valley. The schools in Alum Rock School District do not have the experienced teachers. They don't have the resources that schools like Willow Glen, where I went to school, they just are perpetuating the inability of people to get ahead. And that's something that they know and we should know, because that's one of the things. I mean, obviously, racism and all of the other aspects of this that we know about and have seen. But I mean, when people are hopeless, when people don't think they have any power, and not to justify some of what's happened, but it really does impact how they're going to act in a situation like what we're seeing now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like we were talking about also earlier, I mean, we could understand why there would be this upset. Now, of course, the violence piece and the loitering and the breaking of businesses,
Right.
breaking of car, that's a separate issue that I think really almost makes us convoluted, the issue, right? So, kind of if you were in the situation, and one of the issues that I mentioned to you earlier was that our interfaith group for American Leadership Forum has met over the weekend. We're meeting again later, and this week we have a press conference where we believe that there has been a little bit more use of force in areas that we would like for the police department to be a little more thoughtful about. Although I have to say, the images of watching police getting rushed is very uncomfortable. I don't want to see that either. So I don't even want to put them in that situation. I wonder if there's an alternative way of dealing with this in San Jose. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, as I was mentioning to you, I was discussing this with Scott Seaman, who used to be the police chief in Los Gatos, but also did work in San Jose as well. And there is a concept about community policing, which early on in the relationship between community members and the police, there's more of a, we're all in this together. We're not here to enforce any particular brutality. We're not here to overreact. We're here to work together for the purposes of the whole community. And obviously there are going to be circumstances, there's no question, there are going to be circumstances where it's going to be necessary, but probably the kind of force that's being used now, particularly in San Jose, where it does not appear to have been necessary in many circumstances. It really should be a situation where the police try to de-escalate rather than first, and try to show people that they are trying to be reasonable and understanding how they feel. And you talked about police walking with people in in the demonstrations, and that has been done in places, and it's really makes a difference because people feel like they're allies rather than they're just holding up guns and being aggressive. And the aggressiveness part of policing isn't necessary. It's not necessary.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are going to be bad guys, and sometimes the police are going to have to defend themselves, and they're going to have to defend the property as well, but certainly not as their first act with demonstrators who at the time perhaps were nonviolent.
Right. In the beginning, they all have been really nonviolent, at least in our area. They were nonviolent and they become violent. And like we were talking about earlier also, I just would hope that would be viewed as an opportunity for us to work together. I mean, I really think our police should walk with the people and say, we too are standing up. We aren't like this as a police force. We've worked very hard at being sensitive. And look, there's still work to go. But we have part of our interfaith group has something called Beloved Community that's been working 5 years with the police department and with the chief. And they're working very hard at being sensitive to all our communities. So I think that would be such a better statement. And if they were with them, then they could kind of go to if they get near a store, they can kind of say, hey, maybe you want to rethink that. But I really wish we could have a different take on that. And I appreciate your approach, which is really more of a team approach. We need a community sense, right?
We really should. And, of course, we're all dismayed by, in particular, the stories of small businesses that have been looted and attacked. And, all those things are really inappropriate. And I think, as we were talking about a little earlier, a lot of these demonstrators are young, number one. And so they're not thinking in a way that we at our ages do about some of these things. And I think they need guidance in that, and police could be able to guide them as well about how what they're doing is really hurting, particularly in San Jose. And I was down there yesterday cleaning graffiti, and I know, I have a law office that I work in, and across the street is a wonderful Mexican restaurant, and they were just about to open up again and had spent a lot of time and money to fix it up, and it got trashed and things were stolen. And I think if there was some way of communicating to those younger people that they're actually hurting people by doing that, and they're not advancing their cause. It would, early on, had they done that, that would have been a much better way to approach it, I think. And
Absolutely.
we were going to talk, and we can still, about Jewish values, and I think all of these things are Jewish values. They're just imbued in us, and they certainly were in me, about how to treat other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have a lot of good questions coming out. I'm going to stay with a couple of questions that are also dealing with the community as we just talked about it. Jacob Bronstein asks the following: what needs to be done to kickstart reconstruction of these communities without carpetbaggers profiteering?
I think that the whole community needs to come together and understand that these are priorities, and try to work together. I mean, it's not just the police and the community. I think it's all of us. I mean, we know that there's a separation between us. I still have memories, and I know this is kind of going off a little bit on a tangent,
You go.
It's okay. But when I went to Willow Glen High School, I graduated in 1966, and when I left, then I ended up having to work in the canneries and do that kind of work to be able to help put myself through college. I realized, because there were people there, Mexican Americans, who went to my high school, and I never saw them. I had no idea there were any of them in the school, because that was when they had tracking and people were purposely kept separate. And I think we still have a lot of that in our community. And this is just, sort of a one-off response, but I do think we have to try to come together more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And some really good comments. Lana Smith makes kind of the comment, supporting what you were saying a bit too, that, the poor communities have heard all kinds of platitudes from politicians and better programs to lift them up. And I think those things that have been very difficult, besides homelessness, Susie Berlant brings up, which is really the issue about employment and how bad that's going right now in the United States, especially here in Silicon Valley. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that in terms of dealing with unemployment, people losing their houses, and healthcare, the few jobs, but thousands applying to those jobs.
Yes, well, and that's one of the things that we have to recognize, because so many people have already been unemployed, and we know, this is just the state, but it's going to funnel down to the city and to the county. The state is at least $50 billion in the hole. They're not going to, because taxes aren't coming in. And so the decisions about the state budget are going to be huge, and trying to figure out where to get the money, because there's not going to be enough tax revenue to replace it. And there's a lot of ideas that I have. I mean, for one, is that we need to go through the entire state budget with some precision and look at those programs or expenditures that are no longer important in the state. We should reprioritize. We have to see whether state agencies are using the money wisely or at all, or if they're just sitting in big bundles. And I think there's a lot of ways that we could find money, because I've talked to people there, and this surprises me because I'm sort of a combination, very, very sort of business oriented in that sense. And I really believe that the money that the taxpayers are giving to the state government is held in trust for the people. That's what it's about. That's what taxes are for. And so we need to do that. We need to look at that. And they don't do it at the state. The legislature, the Senate, they don't oversee it, but I think they should. And furthermore, we're going to have to make hard decisions about where the money should go. And of course, the ones you mentioned are going to be priorities. It's going to be healthcare, and make sure there's healthcare for everybody. And we know that. That is a clear evidence from COVID that we're all intertwined. We all have to have healthcare. If we don't, it's a danger to all of us. And so that's important. But I also think, schools are so important, because otherwise people can't get ahead. All of the things that are most crucial and to find employment. And personally, I think that, and people have talked about this, sort of a version of the, I don't like to use this term exactly, but of the Green New Deal would be one way to do it, which is to put people to work on environmental, sort of going forward, much more creative ways of looking at how to deal with carbon emissions and other things, and have people retrained, which is why we need community colleges more than anything, to have to get people so that they can work again.
Yeah, even some trade schools, right? Building up some trades and factories in California, and agriculture, all these lovely things that we could do.
That's correct.
The good old days of California. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, Ann. I think what's on a lot of our topics, whether we like it or not, as much as we try to escape it, is this pandemic. So let me just kind of give you, I'll give you initially a softball here. How do you think it's being handled by our leadership?
I'm concerned about how it has been handled. And I will say that, for one thing, I care a lot about our government, because I've been in government my whole career, and I think it's very important for people but people don't trust it, and they don't trust our institutions. And unless the elected officials are very honest, explain when they don't understand what's happening. For example, at the beginning in particular, when COVID first emerged, there was really no discussion about the first order and why that was an order that needed to be imposed. It well may have been, but just to say, oh, we have the right to do an emergency order and this is it, I think begs the question for people, because they need to know, okay, this is the science that we know so far. We're guessing about some of this, but we're guessing because we want to protect health. And I think there was not enough of that honesty that was given to people. And the other thing was there were exemptions made for what were considered to be industry that was absolutely necessary. Okay, that makes sense. But the distinctions that were made no sense. There were same kinds of work, same jobs, but some were permitted to go forward and some weren't as an essential job. For example, early on, they said in Santa Clara County, oh, you can do construction, but only for affordable housing, not for market rate housing. Well, there's no difference in the health impact of those two. So if doing affordable housing is something that's important, great, but so is market rate housing, because it drives down the cost actually and provides more housing, which we need. So that made no sense, and people were upset about it. And the other difference that I thought was pretty outrageous was that, and I know this, I feel it's outrageous because somebody called me and said, I work at Yamagami Nursery. It's been shut down for a month or 2 months when she called me. I have no medical care. I have no income. And I just drove past Home Depot, which has a nursery out in front, and there were a bunch of people in there, probably 50, just looking at plants. And it just really made her upset, and with good reason. I mean, there's no rationale in having that kind of distinction, and what it leads to is a lack of trust in government. And that's, at a time like today, it's crucial that we trust government. Oop, I lost you.
Yeah, I muted myself there. Oh. Whenever I didn't want to make all kinds of sounds while you were talking.
No, you're welcome.
Know me. Yeah, I didn't want to give the Rashi script, as they say, the commentary. Really, you brought up the next piece for me, which is something I think is super important, and you hit it, which is the issue of trust. I don't think there is trust, and I'll put it there. I think when you have a president who talks out of every part of his mouth, it's not even two sides. You pick the sides. When you have really inconsistent leadership that way, and you have divisiveness growing, there is a lack of trust. I will tell you, it's probably the first time in a lot of our lives where we don't really trust on a very deep level the executive office. Mm-hmm. Feelings in the past, we definitely didn't like personalities, but I don't know if any of us have ever felt, as we do now, that there's actually someone, not only do we not trust, but someone who's not capable of doing the job. Right. So they're very inadequate in their role in this. So how do you, on a federal level even, deal with that? And then I would say that I think it, of course, impacts how people vote locally in California and in the city and the county. Right. How do we really change that complete, if you will, reality that people don't trust politicians and don't trust our government? How do we change that, Ann?
Well, I think obviously we have a unique president. On the other hand, there have been a number of stories in the New York Times and other media about different leaders throughout the world who have been handling COVID and how they've handled it. And it's absolutely radical to see the difference between our leadership and the fact that a lot of the things that Trump has said have actually been false, even when they relate to the COVID itself and the health issues themselves.
Or even if the doctor next to him says it and he just contradicts the doctor next to him.
Exactly. And then, I mean, what a lot of people don't know is that is, for him, that is a dog whistle to Fox News and to the right-wing internet groups that forward that millions of times. And that kind of information gets out to more people. And in fact, as it travels, it then comes back and essentially becomes talking points again, that are political talking points. And this sort of falsity, mostly violent in many ways and intended to suppress the vote in this country, because a lot of it, for example, there's been a lot of stuff that he has said that ends up on, there's a Black voting site on the internet, and they get a lot of this COVID misinformation. And why would they be getting that? Why? It has nothing to do with voting, obviously, but it does, because all of that communication is political, and all the communication that he's making about the deep state, and it's only the people like Dr. Fauci who, oh, he's part of the deep state, and that all gets communicated, and it causes people to have a total lack of trust. And people do already, honestly, because they know that they don't have a voice in government. They feel like they don't, partly because of the campaign finance system and the fact that they don't feel like they are actually electing the people that they want. So those are all things that I think need to change. And
there's also a sense of being handled, right? That politicians handle us. And I think that, Sandy Kane brings up to everyone, I think, a really important point, that there really needs to be a rationale for how we make our decisions. And let's share that rationale with.
It does.
Let's talk about why we're doing this. Let's bring in more people into the discussion. We're seeing right now is a complete opposite on a federal level with our president.
Mm-hmm.
We switch gears. How do you think Gavin Newsom's been dealing with it from California's perspective as governor?
I think Gavin Newsom at least is better in the sense that he has said, look, I'm going to impose this, but I don't know if it's going to work. And if it turns out with facts, it turns out with evidence that it's not working, we'll do something else. And I think that shows an amazing amount of humility that he's doing that and saying that. And I think he's trying also, which is something that we don't get from our president, but which is really important in a leader at this time, is I think he's trying to show empathy to what people are going through. And, everybody, whether they've lost their jobs or not, I mean, there's the people who've lost their jobs, so many of them, and the numbers who lost jobs at the beginning of this was greater than in the first 3 weeks of COVID than happened in the Great Depression after several months. And so that alone is enough for people to need empathy. But then there's people who feel trapped at home, people who have little kids who can't learn because they don't have access to the internet, or, all of those things. So people are, really feeling terrible, and they need someone who's going to be concerned about them. And I think that's so important for leadership. It goes back to what we were talking about, even about the police. That's really what we have to have. Because if we don't, I think there's never going to be that trust. I don't agree with everything he's done. Obviously, we're worried about, the fact that he tried to, and I get it. I'll say this, another personal story, but my son is the general counsel appointed by Newsom for the health and hospital system in California. And he has been round the clock trying to deal with COVID. And he said to me, and this Gabriel is one of these kids that if he's not perfect, nothing's okay. And he said, I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing. And, I'm worried and I'm going to make mistakes. And I said, nobody knows. Nobody knows. I mean, as long as we're upfront about it, that we don't know the exact.
See, I think that's the key, Ann, right there. The more transparent and open we are to say, I don't know, the better. And it does seem to me that our governor and Governor Cuomo, who has been out there a lot also, have been very transparent and open about the situation.
Right.
And I just appreciate that from a leadership perspective. Talk about the electoral process and really looking at November. And you have a lot to say about this because it's one of the things you've done. Look at electoral process throughout the world. But it wasn't that long ago. We're talking about a couple decades ago that Jimmy Carter claimed that our own country would not qualify for third world elections. And I'm even more concerned. So Shirley Lee brings up one of my questions that I had in my head too, and that is the issue of November. How legitimate do we think this election really will be? How honest could it really be? Concerns do we have going into November and the election?
Yeah. Well, there's two factors that worry me. And I think in part because I'm sort of obsessed with this issue, it has to do with the propaganda on the internet. Whose name I can't remember, said something like, what the Russians are trying to do is pit American against American and really divide our country. And we can see it now. And it's true, we can see it. And it's not just, as I mentioned to you, a lot of this is being done internally too by these crazy 8chan, these really terrible sites that push false information as propaganda. And frankly, much of it is, as I said, much of it is to suppress the vote with blacks, and it's racist. But there's also an unbelievable amount of anti-Semitism that's pushed by them as well. Because they know that dividing us and bringing hatred, and we can see it. I mean, even Fox News, I think it was Fox or one of them yesterday, and I saw this. They were blaming Soros for all of these events, the demonstrations. I mean, seriously. And the only reason that Soros is the attackee of the right wing is because he's Jewish, because people know he is, and they're trying to spread more hatred. And so all of those things worry me about the election and about how it's going to influence people to vote, number one. But also in terms of the vote itself, the thing that I'm worried about is many other states, even if they do vote by mail, I think vote by mail is really important to be able to get people to vote and more people to vote. But the real problem with vote by mail is not, as the president says, fraud or the RNC suing California. The real problem with vote by mail is in a lot of states, because what they have to do is check signatures, make sure that people, are actually registered, and make sure that the signatures are consistent with the signatures that they already have. Those states are actually And not to be too partisan about this, but those states are mostly run by Republican governors. The secretaries of states are Republicans. And the people who are checking the signatures tend to be people who have some bias. And what they do is they throw out or disqualify votes, mostly coming from low-income communities, without question. There's hundreds of thousands of votes that have been disqualified over the years from low-income communities in those particular states. And a lot of times, I mean, we know this because young people who haven't voted before, older people who have difficulty voting, people who are not used to it, maybe recent citizens, they make mistakes, and some of them are minor. And most places, California, will call people and say, hey, you know, here's your signature, does this, you know, etc. They'll check it, but they don't do that in a lot of states. And so they disqualify a lot of voters in vote by mail. So all of those things can have a potential for influencing the election. And I'm also worried, honestly, because in my primary, it took, I guess the primary was March 3rd. And I think by the time the Secretary of State here actually certified the vote, it was near the end of April or beginning of May.
Ridiculous.
We don't have that amount of time in the presidential election.
No. So, Ann, what do we do? I mean, this is very concerning.
Right.
What do we do?
Well, I think we need more staff. We need more staff. They need to put more money towards it. And I know in California, there has been some more money put toward it, but I'm worried that it may not be enough. I mean, we're a big state with a lot of people that are going to vote and probably vote by mail. It would be much better if we could have an earlier, I know we had it before, but part of what happens is if people vote on the day of the vote and register on the day of the vote, that takes a long time to check it, and perhaps they should have more encouragement of earlier voting so that we can make sure that everything is much earlier, so that we can make sure everything is dealt with prior.
That's a good point. Is there a reason why there has not been any reform on voter suppression in our country?
Well, you know, voter suppression has been a really big issue for our present president, but it's been an issue for a long time, and I think that the problem that we have is that we have a federal system where it's actually the states that have control over voting. And as a result, there is really no agency in the federal government. There's one called the Election Assistance Commission, but they don't actually do any oversight of voting like that. It's dependent on individuals, you know, bringing litigation or something, groups bringing litigation. So there's not a lot of desire on the part of a number of people to be concerned about it because they think that it helps them get elected. It's kind of like campaign finance. There's been no reform of that either on the federal level. And I think it really mostly has to do with the fact that in particular, although it benefits both parties, it benefits the Republicans more.
Yeah, it doesn't benefit our kishkas, though, how long these elections go and how much money we spend in the billions of dollars. Yeah, that's a whole nother area is the need for election reform, and this whole fundraising piece to me, it just has to be, I just think it has to go, period. Ann.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something that is sort of horrific. Most of you may know Joseph Stiglitz. He's a Nobel Prize winning economist, and I have the good fortune to know him, and he's written an article for the Scientific American. And one of the things, which is a surprising place for an article like this, but he's talking about economic disparity. And at the end, he says, nothing is going to change in Congress unless there's a change in the campaign finance system. And we also know people have done, two people who are political scientists, their name Gillens and Page. They've done an analysis of all the federal laws, regulations, and policies. And what they have discovered is about 98% of them favor corporate interests or the very wealthy, and only about 2% have some basis, mostly about issues like Social Security or something. Those are already, they get the support, but most of them are not supported when they are supported by grassroots groups or individuals.
Wow. Amazing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to switch gears on you again, because one of the fascinating pieces of having the opportunity to interview you, Ann, is I actually have this kind of thing inside of me that frustrates me. I want to share it with you, see if I have to respond to it. I really thought that Hillary Clinton, was a sure win. I thought, with all due respect for the Democrats, that Elizabeth Warren was a really good candidate. And I've seen these really strong women, I think, that would make good leaders. And I look at the last election, and we see that 57% of white professional women voted for Donald Trump and not for Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. And so one of my concerns is that, I heard this from another political analysis that I thought was really thoughtful. And the woman said, it was African-American, she said, look, when it came to Obama, we as a community said, we're going to get up and we're going to vote for our person. It's how many chances are we ever going to get? We're going to do it. And in part, that's what happened with the African-American community. They really, in high numbers, voted. They really worked on the campaign. They really were involved. Hillary didn't have that energy with women. And I even say now, looking forward, if we really want to make change, if Biden's going to win, let's say, for argument's sake, those that want him to win, it would just take the women of this country to stand up and say, we've had it, we're taking the country now. That's it, we're done.
Right.
So with that piece, as a woman in politics, in business, in so many areas, women have taught me that they have to play a male game first to be able to get into that field before they can really be who they are. Mm-hmm. And by the time maybe they can have that opportunity, they lose sight of who they are. I don't know.
Right.
But what is it about women in politics, and when can we finally move over this hump and look at people just people, not through their gender or their sex and any of that mishigas? I'll stop with my little minute.
Yeah, well, I can't foretell that, but I will say I think that Hillary, in many ways, got a really raw deal, because she and I, I've met her. I know people who worked for her. She was not the person that was portrayed in the press. And part of that came about, she was portrayed, as being wooden and not empathetic and not a nice person and not warm. And I think the reality from people I know who've worked for her is something completely different.
180.
In fact, Ann O'Leary, who is Governor Newsom's chief of staff, is a friend of mine. And when she was working in DC, she told me she had a baby, and Hillary was literally flying to some African country and called her because she had worked for her when she was in the Senate, to, congratulate her and to ask how she was doing. And she said, this is how she is. I mean, she's like that. And I think Hillary was the victim of two things. One is she had a long history of the right wing vilifying her and spending a lot of money to vilify
40 years of it.
Mm-hmm. Because she was a woman, because she wouldn't bake cookies. when she was, in the White House. And so, number one. But also, during the election, there was a significant amount, whether people believe it or not, there was, I know, and, there was a significant amount of propaganda that was false about Hillary. And in fact, there was a book written by Kathleen Hall Jameson that I would commend to all of you, where she talks about all the things that happened in that election, including the stealing of the emails, the propaganda, all of the other events, the Comey, all those together. And she said, without a doubt, she thought, and she actually said, beyond a reasonable doubt, and she's a very well-respected voting rights person, that the election was stolen, that it was for Hillary. But let me also say, Hillary was damned either way. I mean, seriously, because if she looked too gracious, too feminine, then people would say she's a wimp. And if she's too tough and too masculine, they will say, kind of like what they said about Elizabeth Warren, oh, she's too harsh, or she's too much like a school marm, or whatever. Exactly. So, you cannot win either way. And when, Trump was like behind her menacing, right, at one of those, debates, the country should have been appalled by that.
That's right.
And she didn't do anything because she knew, I presume, that she would look bad to the public if she reacted to him one way or the other.
Parenthetically, and in an interview that I heard, she said that. She said, I didn't know at that moment, if I turn around and said something to him, they'd think, oh, here comes the bitch again. And by not saying anything,
right.
So she knew it. And I think he knew that too, which is absolutely how he played that.
Yeah.
It was a very sad and disgusting moment and a precursor of what we were going to see, I guess, right? In some ways.
Yeah. I have to say something to this Jewish audience, because I was reading something about, about Jewish values. And I've thought about this a lot because I got the Jewish caucus support at the legislature, of course. And, and I read something about that a rabbi said that I think was really meaningful. And it was this, as we get back to Trump, that when Hitler rose to power, it wasn't by, force. It was by his propaganda. It was by the things he said that convinced people. And that's how he got elected. That's how he got to power. And then it was only then that he started, putting people in concentration camps and the like. So we have to remember that what people say and how they say it and how they communicate to the people is really a big deal.
Absolutely. Words matter.
They do.
Matter when it comes down to it, especially from a leader.
Right.
One note from Lana Smith everyone should read. I've heard it was very good also, the Hillary Hulu documentary series. So that may be worth checking out for those that want to see more about that. So, in terms of, let's talk about that, in terms of Jewish identity a little bit. What does drive you, Ann, in doing this? I mean, with all due respect, do you really want to get involved with all this mishigas? You're a smart lady. You really want to do this, Ann. What's driving you to do this?
I know. I sometimes say, yeah, I was kind of insane. Actually, I love this. Someone on my Facebook page, who I was a fellow county counsel at the time I was county counsel, said to me, "You are the worst retired person I have ever seen." And I think it goes back to, and we were talking a little bit about this too. I mean, the way I was raised, honestly, and so that does in large part have to do with Jewish values and what I think they are. My mother was an immigrant, but her family had died in the Holocaust. But the rest of the family her parents went to Brazil, and that's where she was born and raised. And, but they strongly instilled in me, not only what happened in the Holocaust, which was huge in my upbringing, but also how important it is for people to stand up, how important it is for people to make a contribution to the community. And so for me, doing this really has nothing to do, obviously, with wanting to have a political career, and I'm not going to run for president, I promise. So, it's really because I saw things like homelessness, like the disparity, like the fact that one of my sons, despite the fact we were helping him and his 2 kids, couldn't afford to live here and moved away. All of those things made me feel that things have not changed enough in our state, and that our state can actually be a standard bearer for the rest of the country. And that's the only way to make a change in the federal government too. So that's why I'm doing it. It's just part of the DNA. That's
nice. No, I think it's fantastic. So you feel calling on some level to get involved.
Mm-hmm. I do. And here's a funny story. And I know you're all, this is being taped, but I can say it anyway. When I was at the FPPC, I used to occasionally sit with the Governor Brown, when he was deciding to veto matters having to do with campaign finance. And he had such disrespect of the legislature that it never occurred to me that I would want to run for the legislature. But then I talked to people like Joe Simidian and others who have been there and said, this is a place you can really get things done.
That sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a call to action that you would recommend to all of us? I mean, we know that.
Yeah, I think a call to action is get involved. I mean, obviously, I'm sure every one of you votes. So I'm not concerned about that. But I think it's important, to the extent that you can, either get involved in the community and the broader community, and also, encourage people to do the right thing. Because I think there's no better way to transmit values than to talk to people and to talk about them, even if it's not politics. But I think it's a way to show your own humanity and to convince people. So that's what I would suggest. I know it's kind of a soft way to say things, and of course you could vote for me, but that's, other than that.
I think those are important things. Everything that you mentioned are all very important things, actually. And Susie says, join Californians for All. That's an option. I think there's also organizations, we're going to talk about this in High Holidays a lot, but I know that we have a new revamped Tikkun Olam committee that we're just starting to work on, and there are a lot of pieces. We have Moms Demand Action that's very involved with our synagogue, and those kinds of things. So I actually think get involved with an organization like that has a hands-on approach where you feel like you're actually making change in things that are passionate to you. I think, and we share a lot of them, from education to homelessness, to even having fair electoral processes. I think that's the other piece. If one feels like their vote isn't counted properly, it's hard to get them to vote. So that's another piece. We have to make legitimate, we have to find the right way to do this so that one can actually take their device and legitimately vote. Personally, that's what I think we need to be able to do, so that everyone really does get a vote, right? Those kinds of things. So being advocates, getting involved, and if you ever any of you want something to do, come talk to me. I will have 12 suggestions for each of you about things we could be doing. And I want to thank you so much
Oh, thank you.
for taking the time to be with us. You were wonderful. I'm going to now unmute everyone so you can hear.
Let me just tell
Please.
everybody that if you want to contact me about anything, please do. And my email is easy. It's ann.ravel@gmail.com. I'm happy to, talk to anybody and speak to them personally about any issue that you care about in the state or anywhere.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And all of you can unmute yourselves so you can all make a sound of yay and thank you. And Mr. Clock, well done. Well done.
Thank you.
We really do need leadership like you in this country, and we need it on every level. We'll take you where we can get you. So
thank you, Rabbi.
Often.
I appreciate it. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you for being with us.